They learned our mercy was a weapon. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the indefatigable Ledger, a ghost in a sea of holographic light. Before her, the tactical display painted a stark reality. The orbital sphere of Iapix, a civilian colony of 7 million souls, was bracketed by the jagged, aggressive ship profiles of the Cryan hegemony. Their ultimatum hung in the void, a blade at the throat of a world. On the main screen, a timer ticked down with unnerving calm. 27 minutes, 14 seconds. The Cryan doctrine was simple, brutal, and broadcast on all channels for this exact purpose. Any world harboring unsanctioned refugees was subject to a purge protocol. No appeals, no negotiation. Iapix had offered sanctuary to a handful of escapees from a world the Cryan had already broken. Now their punishment was due. The Fifth Ledger Fleet was here to see the bill was paid by the ones who wrote it. Argo status on the Cryan energy screen. Rostova set her voice a low anchor in the tense quiet of the bridge. The deck plates beneath her feet hummed with the contained power of the ship's singularity core. The fleet's mind Argo manifested as a shimmering column of silver light beside her command chair. Its voice was synthesized, but carried the weight of 1 billion parallel calculations. Screen integrity remains at 100%, Admiral. It is a brute force projection designed to atomize any inbound kinetic or energy strike. A direct assault is statistically inadvisable. Their wall was built of pure arrogance. Rostova's eyes narrowed, tracing the crimson boundary the Cryan had drawn around the planet. They weren't just blockading the world. They were holding it hostage, daring the humans to try something. A rescue attempt that failed would only serve as a more potent lesson for the rest of the galaxy. That was the hegemony's way, power demonstrated through the suffering of others. Commander Valerius stepped forward, his jaw tight. They're waiting for us to bloody our knuckles on their shield. The warlord gets to make an example of Iapix and laugh at our failed heroics. The Fifth Fleet does not engage in heroics, Commander. Rostova countered her gaze unwavering from the tactical display. We engage in instruction. Argo run simulation Epsilon 9 again. I want to see the energy dispersal at the weakest harmonic. Before Argo could respond, a new window opened on the main screen. It was a live feed from the surface of Iapix, patched through a micro-relay one of their scout ships had slipped through the cordon. A child no older than 5 sat on the shoulders of her father, pointing up at the daytime sky where the human ships were barely visible. Specks of silver. She wasn't crying. She was watching with a kind of profound curiosity, a trust that was both heartbreaking and absolute. They believed someone was coming to help. We are here to honor that faith. Epsilon 9 is loaded. Admiral, Argo confirmed, the light of its column flickering. The harmonic frequency you noted is unstable, but exploiting it requires precise millisecond timing. The probability of success for a single vessel is 11.3%. That's why we won't use a single vessel, Rostova said, a ghost of a plan forming in her mind. We are going to teach the Cryan the difference between a wall and a cage. She turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Kira. Prepare the ghost frigates for deployment, and get the civilian convoy ready to move. They're about to have a very narrow window. Kira's fingers danced across her console, the soft clatter a counterpoint to the low hum of the bridge. The air tasted of ozone and recycled oxygen, a scent Rostova associated with impossible choices. Convoy is spooling drives, Admiral. They're scared, but they're steady. Steady is all I need, Rostova murmured. Valerius, prepare the mirror arrays. Slave their alignment controls to my mark. They thought our shields were for defense. The hegemony fleet sat in stoic formation, a perfect crescent of warships poised to deliver judgment. Their warlord Scathra viewed the human fleet with contempt. They were known for their bizarre doctrines of de-escalation and their obsession with proportionality. They were weak, unwilling to make the hard choices required to maintain order in a chaotic galaxy. His ships were hammers, and he saw every problem as a nail. Argo's voice cut through the quiet. "Admiral, the Ghost frigates are deployed. They are projecting signatures identical to our mainline cruisers. The Krayan are taking the bait. Their internal comms show elevated chatter about a flanking maneuver." On the main display, a half-dozen false signatures peeled away from the human fleet, accelerating toward the far side of the Krayan screen. As expected, several Krayan destroyers shifted their positions, their powerful sensor arrays turning to track the perceived threat. It was a classic feint, a move so simple, Scathra would surely see it for what it was. But his arrogance wouldn't let him believe the humans would attempt something so brazen without a genuine threat behind it. "They are reallocating shield power to compensate for the sensor redirection," Argo noted. "The harmonic instability is widening, but only by a factor of 0.02%. It is not enough." "It will be," Rostova said calmly. Her heart beat a steady rhythm against her ribs, a human anchor in a storm of data. Kira signaled a convoy. "Tell them to begin their burn in 90 seconds. Valerius on my mark." Their eyes were on the bait. Ours were on the gap. Valerius watched his board, his knuckles white. "Arrays are slaved, Admiral. Ready to reflect." The Krayan screen was not just a defensive barrier. It was an active sensor field. It pulsed with energy, tasting the void for any approaching vessel. This was the vulnerability Rostova had identified. The hegemony was so focused on what was trying to get in that they paid no attention to what their own shield was putting out. The civilian vignette flickered off the main screen, replaced by a direct feed from the lead transport ship, the Stargazer. Inside, families huddled together, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the emergency lighting. The captain, a woman with graying hair and a steely gaze, gave a firm nod to the camera. They were ready. "They're firing warning shots at the ghosts," Kira reported, her voice tight. Lances of pure energy meant to intimidate dissolved the holographic frigates one by one. The Krayan were demonstrating their power, showing how effortlessly they could destroy human warships. "Let them," Rostova said, her eyes fixed on the timer. 19 minutes, 43 seconds. "Keep their attention focused. Argo are the Krayan sensor frequencies locked." "Locked and mirrored, Admiral. Our arrays are calibrated to return their own scanning pulses back to them, amplified and phase-shifted. This is how you teach a blind man he cannot see." "Mark," Rostova commanded. Valerius's hand slammed down on his console. A dozen ships in the human fleet, cruisers and destroyers alike, suddenly revealed their true purpose. They were not just warships. They were massive mobile projection platforms. Vast crystalline lattices unfolded from their spines, catching the ambient starlight like jeweled wings. For a split second, they were beautiful. Then they focused. The energy pouring from the Krayan shield struck the human mirrors and was hurled back, not as a weapon, but as information. The Krayan sensors were instantly overwhelmed with their own distorted signals. It was the tactical equivalent of shouting into a man's ear while he's trying to listen for a whisper. A localized blind spot, a corridor of pure sensor chaos, opened in their impenetrable wall. "Corridor is open!" Kira yelled. "It's unstable, but it's there. Signal the Stargazer. Go, go, go!" The civilian convoy, a train of ungainly transport ships, fired their main engines. They surged forward into the shrieking blindness of the gap, their hulls groaning under the strain of the high G burn. The Cryan were completely unaware, their screens showing nothing but phantom readings and sensor ghosts, where the convoy now raced for safety. Their greatest strength became their greatest weakness. Warlord Scathra watched the human ghosts dissolve under his warning shots and permitted himself a grim smile. The pathetic flanking maneuver had failed before it even began. He had known the humans were fools, but this was a new level of incompetence. His tactical officer turned to him, her multifaceted eyes blinking in confusion. "Warlord, we are detecting anomalous energy readings along the screen's edge. The humans are projecting something, but it carries no kinetic or thermal signature." "Tricks and light shows," Scathra spat. "Ignore them. Keep your fire focused on any ship that approaches the perimeter. When the timer expires, we begin the purge." But the anomaly grew. On their screens, the section of their own shield wall began to shimmer and warp the data, turning to useless static. It was as if that part of space had simply ceased to exist for their sensors. Before the officer could report this escalating problem, a proximity alert shrieked through their bridge. One of their own destroyers, positioned near the sensor gap, was screaming about mass violations in and outside the cordon. "Impossible!" Scathra roared, rising from his command throne. "Nothing has breached the screen. Show me." The display shifted to the destroyer's forward view. 5 bulky civilian transport ships' engines, glowing white-hot from a desperate burn, were already halfway to the planet's atmospheric limit. They had slipped through his perfect defense without a single shot fired. He built a wall to keep others out, not to trap himself. The rage that seized Scathra was volcanic. He had been tricked, humiliated. The humans hadn't tried to break his wall. They had used its own strength to render him blind and deaf. He had been so focused on the fist that he hadn't seen the needle. "All ships!" he bellowed into the command channel, his voice cracking with fury. "Target those transports! Annihilate them, and open fire on the human fleet. I want their cowardly ships turned to slag." But his ships were out of position, their formations disrupted by the pointless chase of the ghost frigates. By the time they could reorient and bring their main weapons to bear, the civilian ships were entering apexes, upper atmosphere, shielded by the planet itself. The first lesson had been delivered. The human fleet met the Crayan's disorganized charge with terrifying precision. Their movements were not aggressive, but impossibly fluid. They didn't return fire with overwhelming force. Instead, they used their mirror arrays again, catching the incoming Cryan energy lances on their polished surfaces. But this time, they didn't just reflect. They did not return fire. They returned the bill. The beams from the Cryan warships were caught, focused, and redirected. A lance of energy meant for the indefatigable Ledger was instead shunted sideways, slicing through the engine pylon of another Crayan destroyer. A volley of plasma torpedoes was deflected into the asteroid field nearby, detonating in silent, incandescent blossoms. The human fleet was a matador, using the enemy's own rage and momentum against them. On the Ledger's bridge, the console glare reflected in Rostova's steady eyes. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal and the faint tang of discharged static. A Cryan beam had grazed one of their aft nacelles, and the damage control report was scrolling on a side screen. Minor, but a cost nonetheless. The hull shuddered as the ship's point defense cannons spat streams of kinetic rounds to intercept stray munitions. "The convoy is planetside, Admiral," Kira confirmed, her relief palpable. "All 7 million are accounted for. The IAPIC's planetary government sends its effusive gratitude." "Gratitude is noted," Rostova said. her attention locked on the swirling mess of the battle. "Argo, what is Scathra's state of mind?" His biosigns, extrapolated from his comms frequency and speech patterns, indicate extreme aggression and impaired strategic judgment. The AI replied. "He is shifting his entire fleet to a frontal assault. He is ignoring his losses. He is determined to reclaim his honor through brute force." "Of course he is," Valerius muttered, watching a Krayan cruiser spin away, venting atmosphere from a redirected weapons fire. "It's the only thing they understand." We were about to teach him a new language. "He's forgotten the board," Rostova said softly. "He's only looking at the pieces. He thinks this is a fight for control of space, but the prize was always the people." She turned to Argo. "The convoy delivered more than just refugees, didn't it?" "Correct, Admiral," Argo stated. "The supply crates aboard the Stargazer have been deployed. Our sensor network is now planet-wide. We have high-fidelity real-time data on every Krayan ship, from their heat signatures to their energy fluctuations." The ghost frigates hadn't just been decoys. The convoy hadn't just been a rescue. Every move had a dual purpose. Every action was a line item in a much larger accounting. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. Scathra thought he was in a brawl. Rostova was conducting an audit. "Scathra is broadcasting again," Kira announced, her expression grim. "It's a fleet-wide ultimatum. He's invoking the hegemony's second tenet. Any fleet that provides material aid to a condemned world shares its fate. He's preparing to fire on us with his primary weapon, the system cracker." A new timer appeared on the screen, this one belonging to the Krayan flagship. 5 minutes. A weapon of fear only works on those who are afraid. "He's going to glass the planet from here with us in the way," Valerius said, his voice low. "That thing will tear through our mirrors. It's a wave of pure gravitational distortion." "His calculus is sound," Argo added. "A system cracker at this range gives us 2 options. Retreat and allow him to destroy IAPIX, or hold our ground and be destroyed with it. Both outcomes satisfy his doctrine." The conflict triangle was now in sharp relief. Scathra's ultimatum was absolute. Argo's calculus pointed toward survival as the primary goal, which would mean abandoning the planet. But Rostova's moral line was drawn in the stardust between her fleet and the 7 million souls below. The beat of the ship's heart, the low thrum of its core, seemed to sync with her own. "There is a third option," Rostova said, her voice cutting through the tension. "One his doctrine has no category for. We are not retreating, and we are not dying here today." She looked at her command team, at the faces of the men and women who had trained for this exact kind of impossible moment. They were ready. They trusted her. "Argo," she said, turning to the column of light. "You have the firing solutions for the Cascade Protocol." "I do, Admiral," the AI confirmed. "But I must reiterate that its use is unprecedented. The energy backlash could—" "The Krayan warlord has made this necessary," Rostova interrupted her tone, leaving no room for debate. "He has chosen his path. We are simply going to reflect its destination." "Hold the line," she sent as a fleet-wide text command. Just 3 words. The universe itself was about to become their mirror. The human ships stopped their elegant evasions. On Scathra's view screen, it looked as if they had suddenly given up. They settled into a wide, loose formation, their mirror arrays still deployed, but now angled strangely, pointing not at his fleet, but seemingly at nothing, at empty space. It was a posture of surrender. His lips peeled back in a triumphant sneer. "Their nerve breaks," he roared to his bridge crew. "The cowards prepare to beg for their lives. Charge the main cannon. They will receive only oblivion. The Crayon flagship, the Fist of Certainty, began to glow. A fearsome amount of energy was being drawn into its forward projector. The very fabric of space around the vessel seemed to warp and shimmer with the strain. It was a display of obscene power, a promise of total annihilation. On the ledger, a crewman in the engine room checked a coolant line, the hiss of the cryo-fluid, a steady reminder of the forces being held in check. He wiped sweat from his brow, his gaze flicking up to a small monitor displaying the Crayon flagship. He whispered a quiet prayer for his family back on Titan, then turned his focus back to his board. He, like everyone else, held the line. "All arrays are in position," Valerius reported, his voice a low hum of concentration. "The lattice is stable. Barely. The cascade requires imbalance, Commander," Rostova reminded him gently. "Argo, open the corridor. Show him the path. The bait is not always what you think you are hunting." At her command, the human fleet did something baffling. They moved, shifting their positions to create a clear, unobstructed firing lane between Scathra's flagship and the planet Iapix. The message was unmistakable. "Here, we will not stop you. Take your shot." For a moment, even Scathra was confused. Was this a trap? Or had the humans truly capitulated, accepting their fate and the planet's destruction as inevitable? His hatred and arrogance provided the answer. They were weak. They were showing him their bellies, hoping he would be merciful. Mercy was a disease he had long ago purged from his soul. "Fire!" he commanded. A wave of incandescent gravitational force erupted from the Fist of Certainty. It was not a beam or a projectile, but a ripple in space-time itself, a crushing fist of physics designed to shatter a planet's crust. It surged across the distance, silent and absolute. It shot through the corridor the humans had so generously provided. And then the trap sprung. "Argo," Rostova said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "Settle the account. The ledger is now due." The mirror arrays on the human ships pivoted in perfect synchronized unison. But they were not the primary actors. The real trap had been laid long before. The ghost frigates had deployed more than just sensors. They had seeded the entire volume of space between the human fleet and the planet with a cloud of microscopic refractive particles, an invisible system-scale lens. The space-time distortion wave hit the particle field, and its path bent. It did not bend much, only a few degrees. But it was enough. The mirror arrays, now perfectly positioned, caught the slightly refracted wave. They were not strong enough to stop it or reflect it fully. They weren't meant to. They were designed to do one thing: fold it. The wave was turned back on itself, collapsing inward along a path Argo had calculated to the nanometer. The open corridor the humans had offered was not a path to the planet. It was the barrel of a gun they had tricked Scathra into firing. And the target was not Iapix. They pointed the gun, but we aimed it. The space-time wave now. A focused, self-amplifying vortex of gravitational fury did not return to Scathra's flagship. That would be an act of aggression, a direct retaliation. Rostova's plan was more elegant, more instructive. The wave slammed into the cryo energy screen, the screen that was designed to stop any incoming attack. The result was a paradox made manifest in fire and light. A shield designed to atomize energy and kinetics was struck by a force that was neither. It was a command to reality to break, and the shield's programming had no response. The shield generators, already strained from maintaining the massive blockade, were hit with an impossible instruction: exist and not exist at the same time. They obeyed the only way they could. They detonated. A chain reaction of pure energy overload ripped through the Krayan fleet. The shield projectors on every single one of their ships, slave to the same network, overloaded in a sympathetic cascade. It was not a battle. It was a circuit blowing. One moment the hegemony fleet was a proud crescent of power. The next, it was a string of blinding silent explosions. Their own shield became their executioner. The fist of certainty positioned at the heart of the formation suffered the worst of it. The backlash from the collapsing shield surged back through its power conduits, tearing the ship apart from the inside. Warlord Scathra had just enough time to see his tactical screen turn into a sun before his arrogance was vaporized. The human fleet stood untouched. They had not fired a single weapon. They had simply held up a mirror and allowed the Krayan to destroy themselves with their own power, their own doctrine, their own hate. The cost of the ultimatum was displayed for the entire sector, to see written in the expanding clouds of superheated gas that had once been warships. "Damage report," Rostova said, into the sudden profound silence of her bridge. The low hum of the ship felt like a reassuring heartbeat. "The Krayan fleet is gone, Admiral," Kira whispered, her voice filled with awe. "All signatures have ceased to exist except for a few life pods and one vessel. A destroyer on the far edge of the formation. It seems the cascade didn't reach it. They suffered a 23% power surge, but contained it," Argo specified. "Their weapon systems are offline. They are for all practical purposes disabled." Valerius stared at the tactical display at the single blinking red icon in a field of debris. "We should finish it. Hegemony doctrine allows for no survivors." "But ours does," Rostova countered firmly. She looked at the lone, crippled ship. A lesson was not a lesson if no one was left to learn from it. "Argo, open a channel to that destroyer. Audio only. The teacher's voice must be the only one left in the room." A moment passed, then a crackle of static filled the bridge. A voice came through, young, terrified, and Krayan. This is the Vigilant. To the human vessel. We do not understand what happened." Rostova leaned forward, her voice calm and clear, broadcast to the sole survivor. "You are not being targeted. Your warlord invoked a doctrine of absolute punishment. We answered with a doctrine of absolute consequence. He built a wall to deliver an ultimatum. We turned it into a mirror to deliver the bill." The console in front of her blinked with a new notification. A public ledger broadcast on all inter-system networks had just been updated. The Kraken hegemony's purge protocol was now listed by Galactic treaty as a self-terminating ideology. Privileges of safe passage and trade were rescinded, pending a full doctrinal review. The consequences were not just military, they were institutional. "Look at your screens," Rostova continued, her voice echoing in the Krayan bridge. "Look at the cost of your certainty. Your fleet is gone. The world you came to burn is safe. We did not fire a single shot at your ships. This was not a battle. This was an accounting." On the bridge of the Vigilant, the young Krayan officer stared at his tactical display. He saw the ghosts of his fleet, the debris field, the serene blue-green orb of Iapix, and the silent, waiting silver ships of the human fleet. They had not moved. They were simply watching, waiting. What do you want from us?" the officer stammered. Their education had just begun. "We want you to carry a message," Rostova said. "Tell your hegemony what you saw here today. Tell them that humanity keeps a ledger, and all accounts will be balanced one way or another. You are free to leave. Do not come back." She motioned to Kira, who cut the channel. The bridge of the indefatigable ledger was quiet again. The lone Krayan destroyer, after a long, stunned moment, turned its battered hull and limped away into the dark, a messenger carrying a lesson written in fire. "Admiral," Valerius began, his voice softer, now humbled. What he just witnessed, they might not see it as a lesson. They might see it as a new kind of weapon. They might come back with something even worse. They might, Rostova conceded. And if they do, we will have to invent a new kind of mirror. She watched the last of the debris clouds cool to a dull pewter gray against the star field. The public tally on the Ledger network confirmed the Krayan fleet as a total loss. On her console, the heat levels of her fleet's mirror arrays finally returned to their baseline. "Argo," she said, "log this engagement. Title the IAPIX incident, and add a subfile, Pedagogy Advanced Topics in. Note that the subject demonstrated a profound resistance to elementary instruction requiring a more definitive, practical exam." A single silver pulse of light from Argo's column indicated her command was understood and archived. The people of IAPIX were safe. The convoy was secure. A doctrine of cruelty had been publicly broken by its own hand. Rostova allowed herself a slow, deep breath, the air no longer tasting of ozone, but of resolution. She had held her moral line. The AI had provided the calculus to do it. The antagonist had provided the energy. The triangle had resolved not in compromise, but in a profound and terrifying clarity. The cost had been paid, but for the first time by the ones who had incurred the debt. A new precedent had been set across the stars. Ultimatums were no longer a source of power. They were a liability, a weapon that could be turned against its wielder with spectacular efficiency. The universe had watched a fleet of monsters devour itself, coaxed into it by a steady hand and an unblinking moral certainty. Rostova felt the weight of that action settle into her bones, a burden and a vindication all at once. Her arc was not one of changing from restraint to aggression, but of perfecting restraint into a weapon more potent than any cannon. Justice had been done not with a sword, but with a reflection. The surviving Krayan would carry the tale, a story of a human fleet that did not fight, but taught. And its lessons were absolute. The lights of IAPIX shone like jewels on the planet below, no longer under the shadow of a threat, but under the watchful gaze of a guardian. A guardian that had proven that the brightest light in the darkness is sometimes just a well-angled mirror. The final report was filed. The board was clear. They came to make an example of us. We did not celebrate. We calibrated. The Fifth Ledger fleet remained in orbit over a grateful epoch for another 3 rotations. A silent silver flock of guardians. Damage from the brief engagement was minimal. The grazed nacelle on the Ledger was already repaired, its hull plate smoothed over by nanite swarms until the scar was just a memory. The true work was in the data. Argo processed terabytes of sensor readings from the Krayan fleet's self-destruction, every energy spike and system failure logged and analyzed. This was the human way of war. Every engagement was a lesson. Every loss, even an enemy's, was a data point for preventing the next. Valerius found Rostova in the ship's arboretum, a sphere of impossible green and soft simulated sunlight at the heart of the warship. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming lunar orchids. It was where she went when the calculations on the bridge became too loud. "The last of the system debris has been catalogued," he reported, his voice softer here. "The lone destroyer has been tracked to the edge of the system. It's broadcasting a full report of the incident to their high command." "Good," Rostova said, her fingers brushing the petal of a flower. The lesson is spreading. That is the point. Some of the crew are calling it the Rostova Reflection, Valerius added. They're proud, but they're also wondering what comes next. The hegemony won't take this humiliation lying down. A junior ensign, barely out of the academy, was nearby tending to a vine of Martian grapes. He overheard the commander and paused, his young face a mixture of awe and apprehension. He had been on duty during the battle, and the memory of the Cryan fleet simply ceasing to exist was still fresh, a terrifying miracle he was struggling to comprehend. He had joined the fleet to protect people, and he had just watched a strategy that did exactly that, without firing a single hateful shot. It felt like a new page of history had been written, and he was a footnote on it. A reputation is a target for those who envy it. What comes next, Rostova said, turning from the flowers to face him, is that we will be tested, not on our strength, but on our conviction. Her words were prophetic. Less than a day later, the message arrived. It was not a grand ultimatum broadcast across the sector. It was a tight beam transmission sent directly to the indefatigable ledger, a message meant for her and her alone. It came from a new player in the hegemony, a name Argo's intelligence archives flagged with the highest threat markers, High Adjudicator Vorlog. The message was a simple video file. It showed the command deck of a Cryan warship larger and more advanced than Scathras. Standing in the center was Vorlog, a Cryan female, whose posture radiated a chilling intellectual cruelty. Behind her, through the main view screen, floated a collection of ships. They were human, civilian freighters, colony vessels, a medical transport. There were 12 of them. Admiral Rostova, Vorlog's voice began a dry rasp of amusement. I have studied the Iapix incident, a fascinating application of physics. You turned our shield into a weapon against us. You used our doctrine of ultimatums to enforce your own. Very clever. You teach by reflection. A worthy principle. The view on her screen zoomed in on one of the human ships, the Starlight Wanderer, a passenger liner. Rostova could see small, panicked faces in the viewport windows. So I have devised a new lesson, Vorlog continued. A lesson in consequences. These 12 ships and their 34,000 human souls are now part of my fleet. Not as prisoners, as components. Their flesh was now her shield. The video shifted to a technical schematic. It was monstrous. The human ships were physically latched to the Cryan vessels. Their power cores siphoned their life support, slaved their very hulls, integrated into the hegemony fleet's energy distribution network. They were not just hostages. They were living armor-breathing batteries. My fleet's shield is now powered by their reactors, Vorlog explained, as if discussing a minor engineering problem. My weapons are cooled by their life support runoff. If you fire on me, you murder them. If you attempt your reflection trick, the energy backlash will vaporize them instantly. Your non-lethal methods are now lethal. Your mercy is now a death sentence for your own people. The video ended. There was no timer, no ultimatum, just a set of coordinates and the quiet, terrifying implication of the scenario. Vorlog hadn't presented a wall to be broken. She had created a knot that could not be untied without killing the rope. She has neutralized our entire strategic doctrine, Valerius said, his voice a choked whisper. The bridge of the ledger was silent, the usual hum of activity replaced by a stunned stillness. The console glare seemed harsher now, illuminating grim faces. Her calculus is flawless, Argo stated, its silver light flickering with what might have been distress. Any known offensive action we take results in a 100% probability of civilian casualties. She has analyzed our response at Iapix and created a scenario where our primary moral imperative, the preservation of innocent life, prevents us from acting. This was the true test of a doctrine built on restraint. So we do nothing? Kira asked, her hands clenched on her console. We just let her parade 34,000 people around as armor. No, Rostova said, her voice a shard of ice. We are not doing nothing. We are changing the lesson plan. She turned to face her crew, her eyes sweeping over their shocked faces. Vorlag thinks she has created an impossible choice. She believes she has made our compassion a weakness. She is about to learn that compassion is the one thing in this universe that cannot be weaponized against itself. Her words were a balm, a spark of defiance in the face of an obscene strategy. But inside, Rostova felt the cold weight of the problem. Vorlag was right. The Rostova reflection was useless here. A fleet-scale solution was impossible. The answer had to be something else, something smaller, sharper. Argo, she commanded, her mind already racing past the problem and into the anatomy of a solution. Give me a full analysis of the energy network she's created. I want to know every junction, every conduit, every watt of power being siphoned from those civilian ships. If they are part of her machine, then they are a flaw in her machine. Processing, Admiral, the AI replied. But any attempt to disrupt the network will be detected. The backlash. I'm not talking about disruption, Rostova cut in. I'm talking about surgery. You do not break a knot. You unravel it, thread by thread. The fifth ledger. Fleet moved toward Vorlag's coordinates, a silent, deliberate advance. They broadcast no threats, no demands. They simply came, their silver hulls a stark contrast to the brutalist, jagged architecture of the Krayan ships, fused with their human captives. As they closed the distance, the horror became more visceral. They could see the lights on the civilian ships, flickering their hulls, stained with the exhaust of the warships they were forced to power. On the bridge of her flagship, the inevitable verdict, Vorlag watched them approach. Her second-in-command, a brutish Krayan named Malok, shifted nervously. Adjudicator, they are not hailing us. They are simply approaching. Of course they are, Vorlag said, with a thin smile. They're trying to project strength, to intimidate us into making a mistake. The human admiral is clever. She wants me to believe she has a solution. And does she? Malok asked. There is no solution, Vorlag stated with absolute certainty. She can watch, she can beg, or she can retreat in shame. Any other action kills her people. She is a prisoner of her own morality, and she will serve as the perfect example to the rest of the galaxy of why such sentiment is a fatal flaw. She saw morality as a cage. We knew it was a key. On the ledger, Rostova, Valerius, and Argo stood before the main tactical display. It showed a dizzying three-dimensional schematic of Vorlag's fleet and the parasitic connections she had established. Red lines of power flowed from the human ships into the Krayan war machines. The connections are physical umbilicals, Argo reported, highlighting a series of thick armored conduits. But they are controlled by a networked software protocol. Each umbilical has a magnetic lock and a fail-safe hard seal at both ends. Severing them would require either a massive energy surge or direct physical access. Direct access, Rostova repeated, her eyes tracing the path a small ship might take. A boarding party. Impossible, Valerius countered immediately. Her ships will have overlapping point defense coverage. A shuttle or a boarding pod wouldn't last 5 seconds. And even if it did, the moment they detected a breach, they would just vent the civilian ship's atmosphere or overload its reactor. The problem seemed to close in on itself, every potential solution leading back to the same deadly conclusion. The beat of the ship's singularity core was a low, steady pulse beneath their feet, a reminder of the immense power they held but could not use. A faint scent of ozone hung in the air from the overworked tactical display. Then a new message from Vorlag appeared on the main screen. It was another video. This time she stood before the captain of the medical transport, the Florence. The man was bruised, but defiant. "Admiral Rostova has not seen reason," Vorlog declared to the camera. "She continues her pointless advance. It seems a demonstration is required. The hegemony teaches that redundancy is inefficiency. Therefore, this vessel and its crew are now deemed inefficient." Behind her, a Cryan guard raised a plasma rifle. "You have 1 hour," Vorlog said, looking directly at the camera at Rostova. "1 hour to withdraw your fleet to the system edge. If you do not, the Florence will be purged. A new clock will then begin for the next ship. The lesson will continue until you have learned it." They turned hostages into a countdown. The bridge crew of the Ledger watched in horrified silence. This was the escalation Rostova had feared. A slow, methodical execution designed to maximize psychological pressure. Vorlog was not just using the hostages as shields. She was using them as a tool of terror, forcing the humans to watch them die one by one. "This changes everything," Valerius said, his voice raw. "We can't let this happen. We have to act, even if it's risky." The risk has not changed, Argo calculated. A direct assault still results in a 99.8% chance of catastrophic failure and the loss of all civilian lives. "Then find me the 0.2%. Rostova snapped, her composure cracking for just a fraction of a second. She took a breath, centering herself. The desperation she felt was a fire, but she had to forge it into a tool, not let it consume her. "Vorlog made a mistake. She gave us a clock." "A clock is a weapon, Admiral," Valerius argued. "It's on her side." "A clock is a measurement of process," Rostova corrected him, her mind seizing on the thread. "And a process can be interrupted. She showed us the captain of the Florence. She showed us her guards. She showed us her own bridge. She is arrogant. She believes she is untouchable." Rostova's gaze was fixed on the schematic of the umbilical connections. "Argo, you said the umbilicals are controlled by a software protocol. Is that network isolated?" "It is a closed network," Argo confirmed, "encrypted and running on a dedicated physical layer. However, the Cryan engineering philosophy prioritizes function over absolute security. There are diagnostic backdoors. If we could get a signal injector close enough." "Close enough is the problem," Valerius reminded them. "Point defense." "The point defense targets objects with mass and energy signatures," Rostova mused. "But what if the injector had neither?" A plan audacious and seemingly impossible began to form. It was not a grand fleet-scale reflection. It was a whisper in the dark, a single grain of sand in the gears of a great and terrible machine. A whisper can be louder than a cannon shot if you aim it at the right ear. "Kira," Rostova ordered, her voice now sharp with purpose. "Prepare the scryer drones, the microscopic ones. We're going to paint a target we can't see." She turned to Valerius. "And get your best zero-G infiltration team ready. They are not boarding a ship. They are going for a walk." The plan was threefold. First, they would launch a cloud of microscopic sensor drones, too small for point defense to track, to get a high-fidelity scan of the umbilical connection points on the Florence. Second, they would use the Ledger's most esoteric piece of technology, a focused neutrino beam. It was designed for deep space communication, capable of passing through solid matter. They would modulate it with a simple repeating signal, a carrier wave. Third, the infiltration team, equipped with specialized gear, would launch in a high-G shuttle, disguised as a piece of debris from the Iapix engagement. Their goal was not to breach the hull, but to attach a small device to the outside of the Crayan flagship, a signal amplifier. The device would catch the neutrino beam passing through the ship and convert its signal into a localized high-energy broadcast. A broadcast that would activate a virus Argo had designed to attack the umbilical control software. It was a bank shot across 3 different domains of physics. If any part failed, the hostages on the Florence would die. Their chain had a weakness: the software that forged the links. The Scryer drones, a glittering dust cloud, were launched inside a cloud of coolant vapor, an insignificant puff of gas. They drifted across the void unnoticed and began their work. High-resolution images of the umbilical attachment points flowed back to the Ledger's bridge. They could see the magnetic clamps, the power conduits, the diagnostic port covers. "We have our target," Kira confirmed. The timer for the Florence read 41 minutes 12 seconds. "Infiltration team is ready," Valerius reported from the launch bay. He was leading the team himself. "We're suited up. Just give the word." "The word is precision, Commander," Rostova said over the comm. "No heroics. Plant the amplifier and get out. The ship and the beam will do the rest." "Understood," Valerius replied, his voice tight with adrenaline. The hiss of his suit's oxygen supply was the only other sound on the channel. The debris, a salvaged hull plate with a small shuttle clamped to its underside, was ejected from a cargo bay. It tumbled slowly toward the Cryan fleet, one more piece of junk in the void. Vorlog's sensors registered it and dismissed it as insignificant. Arrogance was a powerful cloaking device. They were watching for a sword, so they never saw the needle. The shuttle detached from the debris field and began a silent, nerve-wracking approach, its engines cold, running on batteries, and careful bursts of maneuvering thrusters. On the bridge, Rostova watched their progress, a single red icon crawling across the tactical display. The seconds stretched into eternities. Her own heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. They reached the hull of the inevitable verdict. Valerius's voice was a harsh whisper over the comm. "We're on the surface, moving to the coordinates." The minutes ticked by. 28 minutes remaining. The bridge was a tomb of silent tension. Every crew member was frozen at their station, their eyes glued to the displays. "Amplifier is in place," Valerius finally reported. "We are pulling back." "Argo," Rostova said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her soul. "Target the amplifier. Fire the neutrino beam." "Beam is away," Argo confirmed. "Signal is propagating." Nothing happened. For 10 agonizing seconds, the tactical display showed no change. The Florence remained tethered its life support numbers, which they could monitor through faint energy emissions still dropping. The timer kept ticking. "It's not working," Kira breathed. "Hold steady," Rostova commanded, her knuckles white on the edge of her command chair. Then a single red light turned green. On the schematic of the umbilical network, a single icon representing the lock on the Florence flickered. The virus was in. Argo was now fighting the Crayon software, a silent, invisible battle in lines of code. "I have control of the primary release command," Argo announced, its synthesized voice a symphony of triumph. "But there is a failsafe, a dead man's switch. If Adjudicator Vorlog's command signal is interrupted, or if her biometric signs cease, all umbilicals will detonate." Rostova's blood ran cold. Of course, Vorlog had anticipated even this. They could free the Florence, but Vorlog had ensured her own survival. If they took her out, she would take everyone with her. This was the final escalation, the ultimate expression of her cynical doctrine. "She's chained her life to theirs," Valerius spat over the comm, his shuttle now clear of the Crayon flagship. The timer showed 19 minutes. They had the key to the lock, but the key was trapped in a box that would explode if they tried to open it. A true leader does not break chains. They hand the prisoner the file. Argo! Rostova said, a new, even more desperate plan taking shape. Can you open a communications channel not to the Crayon? To the captain of the Florence, a tight beam audio only routed through the umbilical's diagnostic systems. The bandwidth is minimal, Argo replied. It is possible, but what can he do? He is a prisoner. He's a captain, Rostova corrected. There's a difference. The channel opened with a crackle. This is Admiral Rostova of the Indefatigable Ledger. Captain, do you read me? A shocked, weak voice came back. Admiral, my God, we thought you had abandoned us. We never abandon our own, Rostova said, her voice a low, reassuring anchor. Captain, we are about to give you command of your own ship back. The umbilical connecting you to the Crayon vessel is about to be released. But when it does, the Crayon will detect it. They will try to destroy you. We have no weapons, the captain said, his voice laced with despair. Our main power is gone. We are sending it back, Rostova stated. Argo is bypassing their siphons. You will have full power in 10 seconds, but your shields will be weak. You have to burn, Captain. Burn for deep space. Do you understand? We understand, the captain replied, his voice now steel. Just give us the chance. Hope is the only fuel that burns hotter than fear. Valerius, Rostova ordered. As soon as that ship is free, I want you to make a lot of noise. Target their point defense cannons, their sensor arrays, not their reactors, not their bridges. Rattle their cage. Give the Florence a window. With pleasure, Admiral, he replied. Argo, on my mark, Rostova said, taking a final deep breath. She was not just giving an order. She was placing her faith in the courage of a civilian she had never met. Release the Florence and return their power. On the tactical display, the connection line to the medical transport vanished. Instantly, the ship's energy signature flared to life. Its engines ignited in a brilliant blue-white spear of light. The Florence was free. Just as quickly, the Crayon ships turned their attention to the fleeing vessel. Lances of energy reached out for it, but Valerius's squadron was already moving spitting fire at the Crayon weapon emplacements, forcing them to divide their fire. On the bridge of the inevitable verdict, Vorlog shrieked in rage. How shoot them down! Destroy them! But it was too late. The Florence had a head start. It was a single drop of water escaping a clenched fist. And now the dam was about to break. She did it, Kira whispered in awe. We did it, Rostova corrected. Now we do it again. One by one, they repeated the process. Argo's virus, now firmly embedded in the Crayon network, danced from ship to ship. They contacted each civilian captain, giving them the same instructions, the same choice, the same hope. A passenger liner, the Starlight Wanderer, broke free, its captain maneuvering with the skill of a fighter pilot. Then a freighter, then another. Vorlog's perfect interlocking prison was being dismantled from the inside out. Her human components were asserting their own will. Her fleet, once a cohesive unit, was now a chaotic mess, trying to shoot at a dozen fleeing targets while being harassed by Valerius's fighters. The symphony of her perfect strategy had devolved into a cacophony of failure. She watched her tactical display, her face a mask of disbelief. She had built her plan around the certainty of human compassion. She had never considered the power of human agency. She saw them as sheep to be slaughtered, not as partners in their own liberation. Her dead man's switch was useless. Rostova wasn't attacking her. She was simply letting the prisoners unlock their own doors. They thought our compassion was a leash. It was a beacon. When the last of the 12 civilian ships was free and accelerating toward the safety of the human fleet, Vorlog was left alone, surrounded by her own crippled vessels. Her grand strategy was in ruins. Her lesson had been turned back on her in the most humiliating way possible. Rostova opened a channel this time to Vorlog's bridge. "High Adjudicator," she said, her voice calm and devoid of triumph. "Your lesson is over. Your fleet is disabled. Your hostages are free. Surrender your vessel." Vorlog's face, contorted with hate, appeared on the main screen. "This is not over, human. You think you have won. You have taught me nothing. We taught you that a doctrine built on using people as objects will always fail," Rostova said, "because people are not objects. They are ends in themselves. That is a lesson your hegemony seems unable to learn." "I will not be taken," Vorlog screamed, and her hand flew to a console. "I will not be a footnote in your ledger. Her ship is going to self-destruct," Argo warned. "Then she has made her choice," Rostova said sadly. "All ships fall back." The inevitable verdict glowed with a sickening internal light before vanishing in a silent final flash. Vorlog had chosen oblivion over education. Her final act was one of spite, a refusal to admit she had been wrong. The space where the Cryan fleet had been was now empty, save for the faint shimmer of cooling debris. The 12 civilian ships were being escorted into a protective formation by human cruisers. The comm channels were flooded with voices weeping with relief and gratitude. The human spirit, chained and commodified, had been set free. Rostova stood down from the command chair, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. The cost had been high. 2 of Valerius's fighters had taken heavy damage, and one of his team members had suffered a severe plasma burn during the EVA. But they were alive. Everyone was alive. Her strategy of mercy, pushed to its absolute limit, had held. It had been bent, twisted, and nearly broken, but it had not failed. It had simply adapted, becoming smaller, more personal, more reliant on the one variable the Cryan could never account for: trust. The public ledgers were updated again. The formal record now showed that the Cryan hegemony's doctrine of hostage integration had not only failed, but had been dismantled by the very hostages it sought to exploit. It was a precedent of empowerment, a statement that human life was not a pawn. The mirror arrays on Rostova's ships, unused in this fight, cooled to a dull, peaceful pewter. She found herself back in the Arboretum, the scent of living things, a welcome antidote to the sterile smell of the bridge. The universe was vast and often cruel, but it was not without its moments of profound grace. The victory today felt more complete, more meaningful than the one at Iapix. That was a lesson in physics. This had been a lesson in faith. They believed life was a resource to be spent. We proved it was a fire to be shared.